So guys, we'll go and get started here. Definitely appreciate all you guys coming to our office, and really, I mean, what a great crowd. I mean, like, did you guys really come to hear us speak, or is it because we're offering the complimentary old fashions? I mean, I'm trying to figure that out, but you know, it's definitely good to have you guys here.
They came to hear us speak, not you. I'm pretty sure it was all Brian.
So they're here for Brian.
They're here
That's
for
what it
Brian.
is. Okay, correction. They're here to see Brian.
Then I apologize in advance.
All right, so we'll do some quick introductions, and then what we're going to do is just we'll do just a brief overview of just what the real estate market did in 2023, just like some of the changes we saw, and then get into our 2024 predictions. So I know most of you guys here. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Eddie Bodkin, and I've been in real estate for the past 13 years. Started out wholesaling and rehabbing, and I'm also a commercial realtor, and we also do some work with builders and developers as well. So that's what I do on my end, and so we've got our special guests. We've got Brian Levredge and Jeff Holst. I've known these guys for quite some time, and I consider both of them to be experts in the area. So if you guys want to just give you a quick introduction and let them know who you are, that'd be great.
My name's Jeffrey Holst, and
No, start over. If you guys want to give a quick introduction, go ahead.
What he was going to say is Jeffrey Holst is his favorite person in the entire world.
so I've lived in Chattanooga for 11 years. My background's in general contracting. I also own a property management company here in town, flip houses, build houses. We've done syndications together for 5+ years now, covering industrial, residential, multifamily specifically, and commercial office. So done a lot, enough to be dangerous to ourselves, but yeah, that's it.
Fair. So I'm Brian Levredge. No, I mean, I'm Jeff Holst, and we have a real estate show together on YouTube. We drink old fashions and talk about real estate investing.
It's called the Grace Frank Group Show.
Yeah, something like that. It's called the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, actually, but thank you, Grace, for bringing old fashions for us. And so I mean, like Brian said, we do syndications together. I have apartment buildings in Michigan, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. I currently live half the time in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and half the time here, give or take a little
Means
bit.
I work twice as hard.
It's true. I freeload off of Brian quite a bit. I actually live in that guy's basement when I'm here. So the guy that just walked in, he's my landlord. I sold my house 2 years ago because I thought the market was a little toppy. I think I got the top of the market, and now I just rent places and bounce around.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I wanted just briefly go through just kind of a summary of just what happened in real estate this year, specifically in the Chattanooga market. So I know that just kind of looking at my own deals, what I do as a real estate agent and also as an investor. One of the things I would say is affordability. That's still an issue for a lot of people. I mean, the affordability obviously has decreased because of the interest rate, the rise in interest rates. And I would say the interesting thing that I noticed with all that is not only did it knock out some buyers, buyers that just, can either no longer afford the house that they want, or some that are, priced out of the market completely. It also knocked out a lot of sellers. I've had so many sellers just since earlier this year that have said, well, if I go and sell my house right now, how am I going to go and buy another house when the interest rate is twice what I have with this house? So it's really caused a lot of sellers just to, be more hesitant and not sell unless they absolutely have to. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed. So just, I think that just like right now, things just seem to be in more of a transition. A lot of if you look at the MLS stats, I mean, you still got very low inventory, a lot of people moving here. Days on market have increased. Their sales have actually decreased a little bit since last year. But overall, I mean, the metrics are still about the same as a year ago. So we're just kind of waiting to see, what's going on. But what do you guys think about just kind of your understanding of what's happened this year?
Well, you just said everything I planned.
That's it. Okay. Well, I stole his opinion.
No, I think it's been, personally, it's been the slowest year I've had in real estate since I moved here 11 years ago. And I think, not just on the residential side, but we've seen the same thing in multifamily. Transactions are down 70% nationally. In part because of interest rates, right? People are not buying as much, and and then those that would sell, because there's fewer opportunities, are going, well, what am I going to put my money into if I get out of this? Yeah. So you're just seeing this overall decline in activity, as it were, right? Which I think kind of mirrors residential to a degree.
Yeah.
Do I think those things are going to hold long term? No. I mean, I think, like on residential, when we're talking about the lock-in, right, is what everybody refers to it as. I think the statistics, and they've probably changed some since I read this, but the average homeowner in their lifetime owns 7 houses, right? It's not like the days of my grandparents or some other people in this room where they bought one house and they, stayed there till they died, right? Now it's, job change, everything. We live in an increasingly global economy due to technology. So people can work from home, which means they can live pretty much just about where they want in many cases. So instances where, people are going, well, I got this, 2.5 rate. I'm not gonna buy anything else because we're never going to see those rates again. And there's probably some truth in that, but their hands are going to get forced, right? There's going to be a change in family status. There could be, promotion or something like that, job transfer. That's going to literally force them into the market, both as a seller and a buyer. So I do expect velocity to stay low in 2024 on residential. You probably see price stay about the same. It really depends on what happens with inventory. New housing starts, which are usually the relief valve, they're really low historically speaking, right? So if you don't have that supply coming in to kind of burst things, short of just something cataclysmic or black swan-like, I don't know what it's going to move the needle a whole lot.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point too about the pricing. I mean, because in Chattanooga, we still hit another high for the median price back in June of 340,000. So I mean, and it's still below the national average, but that's the highest we've ever been. So it's been interesting, even with the interest rates going up the way that they have, we still have had prices go up. So again, I think that's another reason for the affordability. So and I think really the other thing that plays into that is with Chattanooga, you've got about 300 people moving in for every 100 people that move out. So we still have a large influx of people coming in, especially from California, from people from New York, all these bigger cities, that are coming here to move because of the affordability. So it's interesting. It's affordable for the people that have a house in San Diego, they sell for $1.5 million and buy something for half that amount here. But for a lot of the local people, I think that's where it's actually putting the most pressure. So that's just one of the things I noticed.
Right. So there's really two things going on, right? You have like the macroeconomic indicators, and then you have this sort of like micro regional economic indicators, and that's I think what you're talking about. But what I'm seeing is a lot of people are. I mean, all the stuff you guys said. First of all, like I agree with everything both of you said.
Good.
As far as the as far as the lock-in and stuff like that. But we are still seeing a serious shortage of housing. Brian mentioned that the new housing starts are down. Prior to COVID, there was a 3 million unit shortage of residential housing in the U.S. Now that's offset somewhat because we've had a slowing population growth, primarily because of COVID. Population growth didn't go up as much because immigration fell during that period, and we also had a slightly higher death rate during that period. But there's still a 3 million housing shortage, and for 18 months, no one started building houses at all, and now it's starting to pick up a little bit. But because of all the inflation we had, people are still very skeptical about it, and then you add in the interest rates on top of that, and it becomes more expensive to do new housing starts. So there's definitely a continued long-term shortage of housing. And then in addition to that, it's really, really evident that there's a long-term shortage of older housing. And that's a real problem because you can't build Class B and C properties, right? You can't build old apartment buildings because when you build them, they're always new. And it's a real issue given the fact that that home ownership has actually declined somewhat dramatically in the last 5 years in the U.S. 69% at the peak, down to 62% this year. 7% of the population, that's 30 million people, no longer live in a home they own. They live in a rental property instead. That is a significant decline, and that's going to continue because of the transient nature of the economy, the fact that people move more, the fact that people can do more remote work and stuff like that is meaning that people are staying in their homes less and they're less likely to buy a house. And then you couple it with all the other factors they were talking about, it's going to continue to accelerate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that you've talked a lot about market cycles, and you kind of had a way to kind of look at when are, things going to transition in the real estate market. But then I know that you've recently talked about, like, you thought that COVID reset the market cycle.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I made a video back in 2013 where I told everyone in the world, I said, listen, the real estate market is not going to crash until sometime in 2024. At the time, people laughed at me and said I was crazy, but hasn't crashed yet. I'm feeling pretty confident that it's not going to crash before 2024 at this point. But the thing is, when you look at the market cycle, it's really dictated by two things: the direction of occupancy, long-term historical occupancy, and where we are relative to the historical average. And right now, occupancy is still very, very high in apartments, in residential, single family, across the board. Now, there are some elements of the market, because it's not a single market, right? Like high-rise office building occupancy is way down, right? Since COVID, that's continued to fall. I don't think we're going to see a huge recovery in that, so that's a different
Shopping malls.
Right, shopping malls are another one. Occupancy are way down. Even retail in general, occupancy is down. But the flip side of that is, in residential, occupancy is really high. And when occupancy is above long-term historical averages, rents go up. When rents go up, it encourages people to construct new property. Now, it's offset by inflation and cost of funds. So we're seeing, instead of what normally happens when occupancy is high, is we see a lot of new inventory come on the market. Eventually, more inventory comes on the market than can be absorbed. When that happens, the market crashes. COVID, because people stopped building new inventory of construction for a period of time, has at the very least dramatically extended the period. If you look at it over 200 years, the average real estate market cycle is 18 years. A lot of people say it's 10 years, but it's just not true. It's always been 18 years. That's where we came up with the 2024 prediction. I wish I could claim it as my own, but there was this guy, Fred Fulvery, who is from Cornell. He was an Austrian economist, and he charted all this stuff, and he wrote an article called The Depression of 2008, where he plotted out the next cycle from 2008 till 2024. What was interesting about his article was that he wrote it in 1999, The Depression of 2008. So when I saw that, I was like, I need to follow this guy. And I then recently, I was preparing for a speech in San Juan, and I went to find out what does he think's going on in the market cycle right now. And I found out he died of COVID, so I have no idea.
Co-opted.
Yeah, so now it's my idea. But my idea is, I think we have a couple of years before we see any real significant reduction in pricing on housing, offset a little bit by inflation and offset a little bit by interest rates. I suspect interest rates will start falling next year, probably faster than Tuba thinks they will.
One was, as I walked in here, the radio told me that interest rates had dropped to 7.5. And the question is, that's a fact. The question is, how far do they have to drop where people, the housing market changes again? And you were just saying you think it's going to change faster than Tuba thinks, but how fast will that be, and where does it need to go? Where's the magic number where people suddenly change their minds about the direction of the market?
Yeah, so it's definitely psychological, right? So what happens is people who've been thinking about buying for the last 6 months to a year, if interest rates go down 0.5%, they might make that decision. People who are just sort of toying with the idea and they're not really in a hurry, it's going to be a bigger reduction. So I think we won't see a significant change relative to interest rates until interest rates fall into the fives, but high fives, like 5.95, not 4.95.
We already went half a percentage.
That was a massive intervention because of the Fed doing a bond buying.
Okay.
Right,
So
and I don't know how
they're
long
not
that'll last.
they're not going to
Do that again.
continue doing that in perpetuity.
Okay. But I mean, that was huge. That was almost
It's a
half
gigantic
point.
reduction.
Yeah.
And the Fed also indicated today, though, or at least Jerome Powell did in a closed door meeting that got reported on, that they don't think they've done quite enough to tame inflation, which means they're not ready to reduce rates yet.
I don't think we're going to see rates come down really at all next year, unless something, again, cataclysmic happens, then they really need to respond.
Rates will be sub 6 before the end of next year. I guarantee
We
it.
have an election year,
have a
and it's
difference
in
of opinion?
everybody's interest for it to be down a little bit. But anyway, all right, second question. So, what do you think about repurposing properties that no longer have the occupancy that they have had in the past? For example, why are we not talking about housing in office buildings
Yeah,
or
so-
housing in shopping malls?
So
It's
they are
incredibly expensive.
So they are doing
Is
it
it?
in some markets, and what you tend to see actually is repurposing commercial to commercial. So shopping malls become office space, stuff like that. The problem is both of those sectors got hit at the same time, and you know what Brian was saying, it's super expensive because you have to put in new plumbing and you've got to make them safe for living, and you've got all kinds of wiring, and also you want to individually meter stuff. I mean, you do see people doing it sometimes, but it is very expensive and
More
it's-
than building new.
Building codes are vastly different to a degree between commercial and residential construction. And so outfitting, for instance, residential construction, every bedroom has to have two forms of egress, right? 2 ways in, 2 ways out. That can be 2 doors, it can be 2 windows. Really a door and a window is what's most common. And so go into an old Sears, how many windows do you see there, right? And then how much wasted square footage are you going to have in the middle of that floor plan, for instance, right? So high-rise office poses a similar problem for those same reasons, because you can't build multiple stairwells up and down those buildings that haven't already it's just not feasible. And structurally, it will also weaken the integrity of the building. That's number one. But and something I wanted to piggyback on what Jeff was saying, we can have these discussions in both a macro and a micro level. And, Eddie had touched on, we're talking about Chattanooga. We may not see much happen here in Chattanooga. And that's kind of my personal opinion. But there were a number of markets, not a number, but there were a couple markets that weathered 2008 really well for different reasons. Denver and Washington, D.C. You didn't really see much of a price decline in them for different reasons, right? DC's got all the money from the rest of us. And Denver was a migratory issue, right? People getting out of other high cost of living Western states like California. So I think Tennessee now is starting to see those same migration patterns. So, you've got it's business friendly environment. There's no income tax no personal income tax. There's most definitely a business one. And, people, I've had friends that have moved here from California, sold their houses for, netted out almost $2 million, paid cash for something in Nashville and still had money left over. And then gave themselves a giant pay raise because now they're not paying, a 10 to 13% state income tax rate by staying in California.
Did you have a third question? I'm sorry.
Did, and it was about the micro. With the development of the Main Street corridor, won't that change housing availability?
Yeah, so it can, but we're still dealing with a huge shortage of housing. It's actually less bad in Chattanooga than it is on average in the rest of the U.S. There are places, of course, where there's a surplus of housing because businesses close, people move out, and then there are places with huge dramatic shortages. We're kind of in the middle, right? We don't have a huge shortage of housing, but we do have a small shortage of housing here. And the Main Street corridor, sure, it'll bring some new units online, but again, it's not just new units that are the issue. It's also, affordable units, right? Because some people, if you build the apartments that are $3,000 a month, they may not fill, and the prices will have to keep coming down. And at some point, people stop building them because they can't build them at a price that's profitable. And so we can be in a situation like right now where there's not a lot of new construction going on, and there's a need for more housing. And it's going to be a challenge to navigate nationwide and also locally.
Yeah, and I think it's also why you're seeing, at least in Chattanooga, if you start looking around most anywhere downtown, there's new apartments, townhomes, stuff popping up all over the place. Just for the affordability factor, especially townhomes. I mean, it's cheaper because they're connected versus the individual houses. So I think that's definitely part of it. But I wanted to still kind of touch base or talk a little bit more about just the inflation, really the cost of everything. So when you're going to buy an investment property, let's just say it's a duplex, small multifamily, or even single family, your cost of everything just keeps getting higher. Your taxes, your property, your insurance is insane. Your cost of labor and materials. I mean, what would you guys suggest? I mean, people, especially maybe people that they haven't bought very many properties yet, or maybe they're just kind of getting into it. Like, what would you suggest in terms of like how do they make those numbers work? Or
Build everything out of concrete.
You heard it right there.
No, so I think the thing is there are still deals out there. You can still find things that work. You just have to be really clear about what your parameters are, because not every deal works, and right now it's harder to find good deals. It just is. But when it's harder to find good deals, that's also where you cut your teeth and have opportunity to have real growth. Because we could see huge increases in property values over the next 5 years. So what you buy now that works, when interest rates go down, it's going to work even better. When rents go up, it's going to work even better. So if you can find stuff that works now, buy it. If not, be conservative, keep your capital on the sidelines, put in a 5% interest rate, and chill out and wait for the good deals.
Why don't you tell your buyers, buy now?
Right, you refinance.
There's a saying, you marry the asset and you date the debt, right? So interest rates fluctuate and they're thus temporary. And so like most commercial financing, it involves some kind of like an adjustable rate loan or a term loan. And you'll see those term loans typically go from 3 to 7 years. Which put differently means when that loan matures, you're renewing that loan, assuming the bank wants to keep it, into whatever the interest rate environment is at that time. So, we did a bunch of stuff at 3.5 in the last, in 2021. I mean, I wish we did a lot more, but that's all gonna, it's gonna be time to pay the fiddler on those in a few years. And yeah, are they gonna work a little bit less well? Sure, but you know what? Their rents will go up. There's always this game of kind of cat and mouse with income and expenses, okay? And as long as you have a market, you're investing in a market where there's population growth due to job creation and so forth, like we're seeing here, then, things like insurance going up astronomically like it has the last couple years, it's going to eat in your margin. There's no doubt about that, right? But you'll see generally with the demand that those rents will continue to rise. I own a management company. We handle quite a bit of workforce housing around town. We really haven't seen any softening in demand for any of those assets in multifamily. In fact, we've continued to push rents up.
No, and that's with rents going up pretty significantly, right? Like you're still seeing, double-digit rent increases annually for 5 or 6 years in a row now. And that's, when you compound that over 5 or 6 years, that's 100% increase in rent. Apartment building I bought in 2017, the rents were just under 600, they're 1,300 now. That's insane. Like that's a double of a value plus, right, on the value of the apartment because of how multifamily is evaluated as far as value goes. And those kinds of things continue to happen. And when inflation's up, it has to happen. Like inflation, cost of goods drives wages, which drives affordability. So by inflation coming down now over the last 6 to 12, I mean, it's still high, but it's down relative to where it was a year ago. You're going to see a lagging increase in wages and rents for the next couple of years, even if inflation goes back to a more, well, I would argue it's normal now. If you look at long-term historical averages, 5% is about an average inflationary rate. But if we're going back to that goal of having like sub 2% inflation that the Fed's wanted since the mid 80s, if we get back to that, that's great. But rents are going to continue to go up for a period of time because they have to make up for the inflation that we've had over the last year or two.
Do you guys think right now, just with rates and like you said, buyers and sellers slowing down, do you think that whether it's from a flip or rental standpoint, that location is, do you think it's more important to focus on location, whereas before you were kind of able to, like, as long as you had some good equity and you were able to, some good equity after you finished the remodel, it was pretty much going to sell. But do you think now it's more important to be picky on the location of the property as far as if it's going to resell, because everybody's more picky with
I think the
what
dollar
they want to buy?
amount is going to matter the most, right? If you can stay below 400,000, then stuff is still selling pretty reasonably, especially if it's a well done flip. But I do want to make one observation. When I was talking about double-digit rent increases earlier, I meant everywhere except for our house.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I was thinking about it. It's month of
After the meeting,
yeah.
You guys got
I
to
think
that out later.
your average buyer though is a lot more discerning now, right? This isn't 2021 where you could literally lipstick something and throw it out, right? So to your point, like location always matters. I think it probably matters a little more now, okay? But I also think, as Jeff said, a well done flip, emphasis on well done, right? Don't put in a hodgepodge kitchen cabinet layout or something, because women drive home sales, right? And they walk in, they see a kitchen that looks like shit, they're going to walk on and look at the next one. So you just have to, I think, really look at everything you're doing and drill down on a larger overall scale.
yeah, and like always, it's always important to have backups. If you're doing flips, you have to have a backup plan. If you're building new properties, you need to have a backup plan. You need to know what the downside is. It might be, you need to keep it and rent it for a period, or you need to move there, whatever it is. But you need to always know what your backup is, because the market is very frothy right now. I think that's the word I would use. Like it doesn't mean that it's gonna crash. But it doesn't mean that it won't either, right? It's really hard to predict the future. I would speculate we have several years of increased growth, and I think interest rates are coming down, but not everyone agrees with that. So, and it also depends on where, right? Like, and the asset type. One thing we didn't mention is Class A multifamily is down 30 to 40% in value in the last 2 years. Like everywhere in the country, the big 100, 200 unit buildings. And we're going to see that debt come to maturity, and that is going to cause foreclosures, which will take even more inventory off the market in the short term, which means we'll have even more pressure to find places for people to live. And then at some point that will correct. And that could drag the economy to a situation where the general value of real estate declines for a period of time. That's essentially what happened in 2008 through 2010. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with the housing, right? It was the way that the housing was financed that dragged the market down, and it dragged the whole market down, not just retail buyers, even though it started in retail. So the same thing could happen here. Commercial, residential could drag the rest of the market with it, because when money panics, people stop buying stuff. When people stop buying stuff, things go on sale. If that happens, we should all be celebrating, honestly, because in the short term, it will be painful for people that are losing their properties, but for people that are willing to roll the dice on the recovery of the world economy, which I think it will recover eventually, they'll make a lot of money.
I think you need to. Cash is king, as I say, not to be too cliche, but there's uncertain times ahead, right? If our crystal balls are that good, we wouldn't be up here talking to you guys.
That's true. And there's a reason we haven't bought anything this year. We're just waiting to see like everyone else.
All that's to say is that you can out what's the term? You can survive a bad real estate investment, right? As long as you've got enough capital.
Yeah.
And that, that really, it solves a lot of problems. Right. And so you sit on your cash.
Listen, if you buy stuff with cash flow and you have, especially if you have long-term debt in place, right? So you have cash flow, long-term debt, and you have capital on the sidelines, you're fine. You're gonna be fine. Like it doesn't matter if the value goes down because you just wait until it comes back up, right? There's a certain former president real estate investor who once said something I think is really useful, and that is, in a recession, cash is king, right? Cash is always king, but what I think his exact quote was that one thing he learned in the 90s was, it never hurts to have cash in a recession. So if you're not sure what to do with your cash, put it on the sidelines, because if we do hit a recession, there will be opportunity. And banks don't like to lend during recessions. So we could be in a situation where there's deals everywhere and no one's lending. And if you don't have cash, you can't buy them.
Very good point. Right?
This is what happened in 2010 and 11, actually.
What do you guys think on that 5% Fannie 2 to 4 unit multifamily? And that's one question. And then the second question is, in a recession, if you have positive cash flow, could you speak to something? What essentially are you talking about when the recession can hurt you as a landlord if you have positive cash flow and the long-term financing in place? What would be something that would be kind
Well,
of
rent's going down, right? So your cash flow goes away. Like if we get a really bad recession where people like can't live places anymore, they move in with their parents, whatever, and so there's just less rental demand and rents go down. That actually hasn't happened in the last couple of recessions. We've seen rents flatline but not decline. But if we have high inflation and rents flatline, then that does lower your cash flow. And if your cash flow goes negative, that's how you get hurt in real estate. Cash flow is a measure of safety. In my mind, there's 4 ways you make money and buy and hold real estate. Cash flow is safety. Appreciation, you don't have any control over it, but that's one way you make money. Amortization is debt pay down over time. And then the last one's the tax advantages. The recession can hurt you only on cash flow, though. I mean, appreciation, of course, goes down, but it's irrelevant if you're not selling. So,
I'll say a failure to evolve.
yeah, just be
So-
flexible.
I can't tell you how many properties I've bought over the years from landlords, both on market and off, primarily off, where they kept their rents low in an effort to minimize tenant turnover, keep a tenant base in place that wouldn't really complain. Well, the problem is nobody gave the memo to depreciation on that, same strategy. So, and inflation is a double-edged sword too. So when you keep your rents low, your expenses rise even faster exponentially over time as a percentage of that. So, typically when we buy an asset now, we take a long-term view, we harden it. We'll spend a lot of money, probably more than most, fixing it up and putting in maybe in-unit amenities like washers and dryers or other things to continue to attract, a base of renter that will pay and appreciate more for having those things. And not only in doing that, we'll also stay longer and take better care of
Also,
your
you're
unit.
putting in more durable stuff, right? So like when you put in granite, it attracts a better quality tenant, but it's also a lot more durable. You're not going to be replacing countertops in 2 years. And especially when you're in a situation where you have good cash flow, you need to be putting that money back into the property. And a lot of people will be like, oh, I just want stability. And like, I'm not, and that's okay. But what Brian's saying is exactly right. Like you're going to end up in a situation where now you have to replace more stuff at a higher cost because of inflation, and you don't have the money because you were spending it on whatever you were spending it on during that time. So making sure you're putting your reserves away is really important, but also just doing that ongoing maintenance as it comes up. And when you do turns, do a little bit extra to make the property a little bit better. You want to be the best property in the neighborhood. I mean, it's not really rocket science. If you're in a B-class neighborhood and you have an A-class building, you're going to get better rent than anyone else in the neighborhood. And you can do that. You can buy a C-class building and fix it up and make it into a B-class building. And if you do that and you're in a decent neighborhood, you're going to be fine.
And how you treat them too. I mean, that doesn't even require necessarily spending money from an investment perspective. It just means be a good human, and you'd be surprised actually how far that goes, because a lot of landlords and commercial and multifamily they don't give a shit about, any of the people paying the rent, and they just, you're going to pay me, you're going to do that, So people that I think treat their renters well will also retain them, which goes to that point.
Would you consider that a good way to isolate yourself from, I guess, what you guys are speaking on? Whatever downturn happens, like if the tenant is a high class or a high net worth individual that is choosing to rent at your location, is that a good way to insulate yourself from future, shifts in the market or something like that by the total experience or in general?
Well, generally renters with 700 FICOs are homeowners, right? So, or they become one.
But you're also going to attract more 700 FICO renters if you have a better property. Like if you have a property near a school, you're more likely to have students live in it. It's the same thing. If you have a nicer property, you're going to get those people that are coming in from California. They don't know what neighborhood they want to live in, so they move to an apartment building for 2 years. And then during that 2 years, they figure out where.
But a lot of what we own and operate here in town is, as I mentioned, workforce housing. Rents on a 2-bed would be $12,000 to 1,400, generally speaking, which means your person making 100,000 a year generally isn't looking at us as an option. You know, it's somebody that might work at Walmart or in the service industry somewhere or something like that. So, and you know, they're much more price sensitive. You know, in my opinion, people that the more money somebody makes, then the less likely they are to be a renter long term, right? Because if they're looking at renting something for $3,000 and you're like, well, hey, I can go buy this house in North Chatt instead and have the same mortgage. You know, I mean, you as the landlord have more competition, right?
Yeah,
So.
and I would say, you know, with workforce housing like what we do, if you provide that better quality product for them, both by treating them like they're human beings and being, you know, aware of the situations that they're in, and then also by having a nicer place, what you're ending up doing is you're giving them an incentive to stay. And that's really what you want, right? Because turnover is where all the cost is in this stuff. And the reality is, moving sucks. No one wants to move, so you have to give them a reason to move. So if you raise their rent too much above market, they're going to move out because people can't afford it, they're price sensitive, they're going to go find a different place to live. But as long as you're keeping your rents around market, and they go and look at other places and they say, oh, my place is at least as nice as the average that's renting for this price, they're not moving because where are they going to go? Like, no one wants to spend the time and energy to move unless they have to. And so I think if you can do that, you do create stability. I mean, it doesn't always work that way. People are always moving. People are transient. You're still going to have tons of turnover. I mean, we have vacancy every single day of the year because we have a lot of units. But that doesn't mean that we don't want people to stay 2 years instead of 1 year, right? Because that makes a difference.
I want to go back to something Jeff said a few minutes ago. You talked about how the multifamily, like the values of multifamily nationally have come down like 20 to 30%. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. So higher end stuff. And I've been thinking that for a while, like people that have bought like multifamily that, you know, where maybe there's marginal cash flow. If the expense goes up, interest rate goes up, then they, you know, could be hurting. So, I mean, what exactly do you think, or do you think there's anything in addition to those things that's causing?
Well, so the main issue is this, right? Right now, if you're sitting on $1 million in cash and you're trying to decide, do I want to buy a $5 million apartment building or do I want to put it into a 5% interest rate account online somewhere, right? Because you can get 5% risk-free, essentially, right? Because you can get like FDIC insured risk-free 5% interest rates. You can go to like American Express, it's 5%, right? 5% is huge. And when you're buying properties 2 years ago at a 3.5 cap, that means your leveraged return, unless you can borrow less than 3.5, which you definitely can't do right now, is going to be like less than 3.5%, right, on your capital. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other variables because you have long-term appreciation and stuff, but when you're sitting on the sidelines trying to make a decision, do I want to put money in something that has risk that I have to manage, or do I want to put it somewhere where I'm just going to get interest? More people are going to choose the interest. It might even on margin, right? If it's say it was 20% chose interest before, now it's 30%. That's 10% less people that are interested in buying those. That forces prices to go down, of course, which raises cap rates. Mm-hmm. And then once the return gets high enough, the investor dollar says, oh, you know what? This now means it's better than my other alternative. And then they start buying again. And I was talking to Ken McElroy, who owns, 20,000 apartments or whatever. And he told me that he lost $1 billion in equity in the last year. Wow. And he's like, I don't care because it's still cash flows. I'm not planning on selling. I never considered that real money because that was just, paper equity. And that's fine if you have really good financing in place and your stuff cash flows. But the problem that we're seeing right now is there's a lot of people that came into the market as syndicators. And for people who don't know, that's just like where you pool people's money together to buy an asset. So people come into the thing and they bought assets at a 4 cap, and now the cap rates are 5, and that means it's gone down 25% in value, and they're on balloon financing. They've got, like, Brian and I have tons of stuff that's going to come due in the next couple of years, and if we can't refinance it, it would be a problem. Now, we're okay because we have a really conservative cash position. We have, good cash flows, but if your interest rate cost went way up and you've got to refinance and values are down, you might not be able to refinance at all. Because the value's down and you have no equity and now you can't afford it because it's not going to cover the loan.
So those a couple things. In the Southeast, we've not seen C-Class really retrade significantly lower than what it's been selling at, right? And this is sort of the $1 million question that I have, because our model is we buy a C, we turn it into a C plus, B minus, right? And in areas that are typically improving here in Chattanooga. So the first apartment of any decent size I bought was in 2016, I think it was. I paid $30 a door for it, right? Now we're at 90 to 100, 110, and you still have your CapEx on top of that, right? So back then, when it was $30 a door, a 2-bedroom might rent for $700 to $800 a month, right? So now those 2 beds rent for, like we said, 12 to 14, just depending on where in town we're talking about. So the numbers still support it.
But not as well as they did before, right? The rents have gone up less.
But you have
fast
to
than
look
the
at
value.
things on a longer horizon, right? We fortunately are in a position where I don't need to make my bones on one deal, right? Now, that doesn't mean I want to lose money permanently for 5 years till rates come down. I'm not going to do that deal either. But if I can reposition a property within a year or two, and I know that rents are going to go up and cash flow is going to go up, I'm going to buy it, because it's going to be a lot harder to do further down the line. And then getting to the $1 million question is, the Southeast, the Sun Belt really it's becoming a destination for a lot of reasons. Better climate, lower cost of living. I think Chattanooga was just named a top 3 retirement destination in the entire U.S. We've got a diverse economy here and proximity to Atlanta and Nashville, right? So you can have the big city experience, on a day trip if you want it. And so all that's to say, and I'm aware of a deal right now that a group bought locally. I'm not going to say a whole lot more than this, for $18 million. And it's a 200-unit property. And they are in it about 20 to 21 million right now, and are looking at selling it or just walking on the debt because they took it on with a floating rate loan. So they're getting crushed. Their debt service right now stands at almost 1.4 million annually, right? And the NOI is not 200 grand, and the gross potential is not even 200,000 a month. So you add an expense load into that, and the math becomes pretty easy.
And
So,
this is not unique to this deal,
No.
because I know of.
but let me finish
Yeah,
real
go
quick.
ahead.
The thing is that I question, so that group, I'm told, will entertain an offer at $16 million. So that's them taking a $4 million bath just to get out of it. And the buyer would come in somewhere between 80 and 85 a door on something like that. And you kind of go, shit, that's actually not terrible, right? The unit mix is more delineated towards 1-bedroom and studios. But the point is, where guys like us might salivate at those kinds of opportunities, you start to wonder at what point then does the bigger money, the institutional guys, jump in and vacuum all that stuff up. So there really may not be much of an impact to prices. Do I think C-class apartments are going to fall 30% here? No, I don't.
No, so 2 quick thoughts. One, that stuff's happening all over the country, right? So that's not it's that example's here in Chattanooga, but you're seeing there was a $200 million foreclosure in Dallas in the last 6 months that I'm aware of. 5 different properties, 1,000 plus units. These things are going to continue to happen. But when you're talking about B and C class stuff, what concerns me, and I agree with Brian, I don't think we're going to see huge reductions in value. But what concerns me all the time is when the spread between the A class stuff and the C class stuff is compressing. So historically, C class, at least 10 years ago, C class stuff in Chattanooga was trading at a 10 cap, and A class was trading at a 6 cap, right? For people who don't know, capitalization rate is just the return you expect on invested capital if you don't finance it, and that compressed from a 4% spread down to a 0.5% spread over the last several years. Now it's starting to go back the other direction again. You're starting to see that a little bit, but it goes the other direction only because cap rates are going up faster on the lower properties, which means they're actually going down in value faster than the A-class stuff is. It's all proportional, so the math's a little funky on it, but it is something that concerns me a little bit going forward, is that the reduction in A-class values could just force people to say, I would rather buy an A-class property than a C-class if it's the same price. Right? Like if I'm going to get the same return on investment, I'd rather have a newer property than an older property, or a better condition property or better location property. And that will at some point impact the B and C class market. The only thing is with the huge shortage of housing that I talked about earlier, it might be irrelevant because none of them might go down in value over the long term because people need to live somewhere. So unless we have some kind of black swan event, I don't see long term, 5 years from now, values are going to be higher than they are now. I don't see any reason there.
I have a question. Specifically, what we're seeing in the retail market behind shopping centers is we're losing out on deals that come to the market, underpricing them by $1 million, $2 million at some points. And what we've been really looking to grow in is bringing capital partners in. We just had a conversation with a group in California that, even Brixmor, one of the largest shopping center owners in the country right now, hasn't bought a shopping center this year. All right, so they have, I talked with Kevin Reevy, the acquisitions guy, and they were projected by $400 million worth of shopping centers this year and haven't bought one. And my question is, are you guys looking to grow in those relationships of capital partners to be closer on those acquisition prices when they do come?
Always.
Yeah.
So I have three thoughts.
Not necessarily on that asset class, but sure. On just about anything I like I like industrial. I like multifamily. If I could get 10 more industrial properties like the ones I already have, I'd be hanging out probably with this guy in Puerto Rico.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
No, I would love to have like 10 more of that one.
Yeah.
Those deals are really good, the industrial ones. But it really comes down to this. So there's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines right now. A lot of people are scared. Interest rates are up. People don't want to spend. And for the reasons that I outlined earlier, why take risk when you can invest your capital and get a reasonable return, especially now that inflation has fallen to roughly what we can get on high rate interest now, right? So if inflation's 5% and you can put your money in the bank and get 5%, you can preserve capital indefinitely in those scenarios. 2 years ago, inflation was 10% and we were getting paid 0% on our savings. So everyone wanted to put their money invested somewhere because they're losing 10% of their value all the time. Right now, we're not in that situation. So until either inflation goes back up some or interest rates come down some, there's a ton of money that's going to sit on the sidelines, which makes it more challenging to raise money for deals. It also, because of the cost of funds, makes it more difficult to borrow that money. So that's why people aren't buying. Like Brian and I were buying 3 or 4 apartment buildings a year, plus a lot of other miscellaneous stuff for the last several years. This year we bought 1 apartment building and we closed it in January. So we didn't really buy it this year, right? We bought it last year. So it's been now 12 months since I've had an apartment building under contract after doing multiple per year for the last several years. It's okay for us because stuff's working. We just kind of chill out and do our thing, but it's gonna be tough. So to answer the question the short way, of course, if someone wants to come in and partner with us to do stuff, we're gonna do it. I'm happy to talk to anybody about that anytime, but keeping in mind that right now people are holding on to capital and rationally so, in my opinion.
I just see the opportunity and the off-market search being so valuable because a lot of these bigger groups are looking on market. They have to buy from the candy shop, so to say. And I think that's just super encouraging to continue searching off-market and looking for opportunities because, the people with the most capital can't see them.
Yeah, well, what you're really talking about is inefficiency in the real estate market. Because the more efficient a market is, the less you can time the market, the less you can outplay the market. One of the reasons why I invest in real estate is it's a super inefficient market. I can be the expert on a specific street and I can outbid anybody on that street forever if I'm really good at that street. But same thing. One of the things that Brian and I have focused on for the last several years, like he said, mid-size B and C class apartment buildings in Chattanooga.
They were definitely C's.
Yeah, C's. Well, some of them are B's now-ish, but C class, C class apartment buildings within 40 miles of here. Well, how many people are buying those? 4, 5, 6, maybe? There's not that many people to compete against. So if we can get kind of good at that, then we're going to probably do better than these people from California that are trying to buy the same thing here. Because they're not here. They're not localized. They don't have that local knowledge. And that's, anytime you put effort into something to get better at it than your competition, and there's inefficiency, so the market isn't perfect, then you can win. And that is the game, right? If you can get paid market risk premiums on your returns and take less risk than the market, you win over the long run. And that's my whole strategy, is find that asymmetrical return. If I can get paid whatever the risk premium is, but take a little bit less risk than the market, over time I come out further ahead. And that has worked so well for me over the last 15 years or so that I've been investing in.
And I think a lot of people need to be prepared to diversify or pivot in what their approach and strategy is. And I started as a single family guy. I always wanted to get into multifamily, and that predominantly is what I do today. But I've got a not insignificant amount of commercial property at this time, and it's both fun and does really well for different reasons, right? So it gives you as an investor a diversification, right, against any one asset class getting hit too hard, right? So if we were to see a significant decline in single family housing prices here, which would affect one's ability to refinance down the line if they were in some type of commercial financing, then having something else to act as a buffer helps you weather that storm. And in any part of the economic cycle, there's winners and there's losers. And so, like you were talking about, retail, right? Well, okay, so malls kind of suck. And in big box anchored retail probably isn't going to do super great either, right? But your smaller strip and C centers, those things are going to crush it. You know why? Because they're filled with businesses that people need. They can't, look, I'm the type that, if I can buy it on Amazon, I'm not going to set foot in the store. I hate shopping, but those C centers, they got nail salons, they got barber shops, and they got liquor stores, which are always a great recession-proof business, by the way. And yeah, exactly. But people need that kind of stuff. That's not something we can get virtually, right? And so properties like that will benefit, right, when things turn and shift and evolve. And so if you can recognize those shifts either before or as they're happening and get in on them, then you're going to be able to ride that wave.
Also on that pivot thing, it's also not just pivoting between market segments, it's also pivoting your strategy. 2 years ago when we were buying apartment buildings, when we bought them, our intent was to fix them up and refinance them in 12 to 18 months. We put long-term debt on just in case, but our intent was to take the money back out and do it again. The ones that we bought 18 months ago, we're not refinancing those right now. We're not, we're just leaving the equity there. We're able to do that because we're not under pressure to do it, but you have to have that flexibility to change your strategy midstream as well, because you can't predict what's going to happen over the next 2 years. And when you buy something today, you're hopefully still going to own it 2 years from now or 5 years from now.
My question is, do you see yourself, or is there a situation where you see yourself kind of restructuring your portfolio to run a bit more fattier instead of leaner, where, say, a building might long-term have a lot more equity in the future, but it just makes more sense to kind of beef up the cash flow short-term? Do you see any properties that you guys have, and what would be kind of the parameters to do that?
No, I think you have to not be afraid to change, right? Sort of just going back to what we were saying. I'm under contract to buy a small office building that's what you call full service leases. So effectively, their office is about this size that we're sitting in right now, and that the tenant pays me on a 12-month lease rent, but that includes their utilities, often internet as well. We maintain the common areas, etc. All they got to do is keep their office clean, right? But those rent for $500 a month, $600 a month, depending on the square footage in that, which in comparison to a larger office building, that has 2,000 square foot suites, you'll see that translated to a lower overall price for the entire suite, as it should be. So, this building I looked at, I was like, well, I'm going to fix it up, stabilize it, and I'm just going to sell it. And then I started running the numbers, and I was like, actually, it looks like it's going to cash flow pretty well. So maybe I'll keep it. But then again, everything's for sale at the right price. And so I wouldn't be so married to one idea that you can't adapt. Right?
I have thoughts on that too. So for me, it depends on your personal financial situation, what's in your best interest. over the long term, you're going to have more cash flow for sure if you have free and clear property. If you don't have debt on it, you have more cash flow. Cash flow is a measure of safety, like I said at the beginning. But the reality of it is, if you need the cash flow now to survive personally, or you don't have a lot of other assets to support it, then as we are in a choppier market right now, having more cash flow makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, if you have a whole bunch of stuff, you can weather a little bit like tighter cash flow because you have other things to support it because you're more diversified. So it's like a balancing act always. And what I always tell everyone is every 3 to 5 years, you should either be refinancing, selling, or having a good explanation why you're not doing that. Because you get a better return on equity if you have leverage, as long as you can borrow at a rate lower than the overall return. Yeah, that's actually, that is how I get the best return on equity.
what he's talking about.
Just let Brian do all the work.
But stronger cash flow and thus really stronger NOI. I mean, that's indicative of a higher value property in the first place, right? I mean, they're one and the same thing. Like outside of, with the exception of houses, like if you've got really great net operating income on a property, and sure, you can offset the cash flow on that by putting really crappy debt on it. But if you're smart enough to have increased your NOI, I suspect that most of us aren't going to do that, right? So then you'll have a much more valuable property because it's just a metric of the net operating income that property produces.
Yeah, as long as it's 5 units and up in residential or it's commercial property.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with like the 1 to 4 units, they're not valued the same way. But again, if you get higher cash flow either through having less debt or better, more favorable debt, it is going to be a safer deal for you. And so you're balancing your own risk tolerance. And so it's like impossible to really answer the question because it depends on like, what does Rob want? It doesn't depend on like what does Jeff want because it's not my decision. It's your property, right?
I mean, in the older interest rate environment, right, when we were in 4 and 5% rates, and I mean lower, but I did the math on this. It was on a 5-year hold on a 20-year amortization at 5, even 5.5. You're typically paying down 14% of the principal in that 5-year term. Okay, and if you also get 3% annual rent increases during that same term, I mean, that creates a pretty big delta, right? It's north of 30% roughly. So it's with compounding in place. So if rates jump like they have, and you're in a position of having to renew that loan, so the bank's like, you know what, our bucket's full, we can't actually do this, thanks, but, go talk to TVFCU or somebody else, right? So, and that was when I started, that was kind of what I focused on because that Dave Ramsey story, right? I think most people know, right? He had all this debt and supposedly the bank that had most of that debt got bought out. And then they were like, we're not going to renew these. You can pay us off now. Thank you very much. And he lost pretty much all of it. I was like, well, I'm not going to be in that boat. So, be careful with leverage, number one. Number two is...
Careful with leverage.
Yeah.
Can't trust that guy.
And number two is just, but if you look at it and you go, okay, I'm not going to touch the equity, but rates have doubled, okay? But you've also increased them 18% just on your gross income basis. And your principal is paid down by, say, 14% in that same time frame. Your payment's not really going to change.
Yeah, your rate might be higher, but when you refinance...
Yeah, it means you'll build equity slower based on a higher interest rate in the future, but like your cash flow should only be maybe marginally impacted.
Yeah, so I mean, but again, it just still comes down to a balancing act and what you're looking for. What are your goals and what is your risk tolerance? That's true of all investment, right? Like that's the strategy.
So Garrett's not a question, and real quick, Brian needs a refill. So can someone in the back grab him some more bourbon?
Oh, you're too kind, Eddie. Thank you. You just bring the bottle up here. Oh.
I was just curious. We've been talking. You've mentioned affordable housing a little bit, and that seems to be a hot topic everywhere. I'm just curious what you guys. Not saying you're going to be building it. I mean, but we live in a world where it's in search of the highest dollar, really. What would your take be on how would you make affordable housing?
It's really, 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 really hard to build affordable housing because the cost components of building are such that the return doesn't work. That's not always the case. If you can get the land cheap enough and you can build In the right circumstances, you might be able to get a reasonable return, but dollars chase the best return, and the best return isn't in building housing. So you need to get tax credits. And this has been true, by the way, for 50 years. This isn't a new thing. It's worse now than it has been in the past. But they came out with the low income housing tax credit for developers, where they basically incentivized, the government said, hey, we're going to give you money to build low income housing. And we see these properties and they're like 15 to 30 year contracts. And by the end of the 30 years, the properties are in really bad shape because they don't work, even in that scenario. And there's really no way to fix that. Like, it's just the reality is workforce housing, affordable housing has to go to older inventory because it has to be pre-existing stuff that some of the value's already been sucked out of the top of it. And unfortunately, over the last several years, we've gotten to a position where there's less and less of that available.
I would add that you would really, if you want more affordable housing, you need to look at increasing zoning density, because that incentivizes developers. And yes, when you build new, eventually it will become old and thus more affordable. But having more of that in this city that we live in is frankly its own worst enemy, because I used to be on the board of the Real Estate Investors Association here when it existed many, many moons ago. And so the city planning folks came and talked to us. And at the time, and I think they're actually still doing this, but if you had a multifamily property, really like 1 to 4 unit, so caveat there, and your power had been turned off to that unit for, I think it was like 100 days, you're automatically downzoned to R1, right? Yeah. So and then they come and they're like, well, we need you guys, you investors, to provide affordable housing for us. And we're like, well, how about you stop downzoning all the stuff and taking literal housing supply out of the pipeline?
Is there a reason they did that? Just a quick, was there a benefit to downzoning, or is there?
Yes, it's called gentrification. Yeah.
I mean, really, the reason they do that stuff is they are favoring single family, right? They think single family is better for neighborhoods, make it into a, like Brian said, gentrified. It's a safer neighborhood, and there is truth in this. You got a street of duplexes, it's more likely to have crime than a street of single family houses. It's just the reality. But that's a function of the fact that renters are more likely to commit crimes than homeowners are, because people who have pride of ownership treat their property differently. And so if you have a high, dense neighborhood of lots of renters, you're going to have more crime on average. Now, that's not always the case, as we all know, but that's just what happens.
Good. I know Bakani's got a question. We'll do final thoughts and wrap up.
Yeah, so in light of all the retail empty spot and empty commercial office spaces and stuff like that, what do you guys think of the whole new Bend project that's coming in Chattanooga?
Well, thank God they're doing it over a long time horizon.
Yeah, they are.
Right?
That's true.
I think it's needed. That might be the wrong term, but I think it's a higher and better use than what's down there right now. And I think anything that improves where we live and draws in and attracts more people is better overall for all of us in this room long term, frankly, because it's going to help support rents, it's going to help support property values, etc. Than looking at, like, I mean, I'll switch gears. I'll use Wheeland as an example. I mean, that thing it's a blight, right? It's so putting a baseball stadium there, minus the potential lead-based issues in the soil. I'm all for it. I'm just glad I don't play AA ball. So.
Yeah, and so I saw something similar happen in Grand Rapids, Michigan. There was an area of Grand Rapids where they decided to put in a hockey stadium, right? And that changed that whole neighborhood, but it took 20 years. It didn't happen overnight. You go there now, it's just super cool. When I was a kid, you didn't want to go there. Like, you didn't even want, I mean, it was all like, homeless shelters and people passed out on the corners. And now it's like, all hip clubs and stuff like that. So long term, yeah, it's great. Like, it's going to bring people in. It's going to revitalize
good development should take
the area,
in my opinion, right? You shouldn't just in China. You guys may have seen these videos on YouTube. They were throwing up whole cities, right? They didn't have the population for them. I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation, but like Guangzhou, which is like an hour outside of Hong Kong, 20 years ago, that was all farmland. And now there's like 15 or 20 million people living there, right? And they just threw all these high-rise buildings up, and it was, kind of like a field of dreams on steroids, right? If you build it, well, shit, eventually there'll be enough of them to fill it up. So, but absent some kind of like top-down command and control economy by the government, responsible development, in my opinion, is, you sort of look at what you've got, and what works now down there is probably not going to be the same as what works there in 10 years. So being able to, again, shift, change direction, etc. They put a fair amount of medical down there, right? And then they're talking about doing a 20-story high-rise when you've got TVA sitting empty and going to auction, and Blue Cross Blue Shield largely sitting empty. I mean, so there's like about 2 million square feet of empty office down there right now. So I don't know, throwing up 20 stories to me doesn't seem like the best idea, but that's also not, my cup of tea in the first place. So those guys know more than I do about it.
And one thing to keep in mind is like the Empire State Building was built in the middle of the Great Depression, right? Like, I mean, that's literally and it probably didn't do really well when it first opened in 1934, right? But still there now. So like this stuff is when you build big buildings and you revitalize neighborhoods, it's not what does it do tomorrow? It's what does it do 50 years from now? That's the thing. So like when you're on a planning commission and you're trying to decide how to direct the future of your city, it's a lot different than if you're an individual investor trying to decide where do I want to invest. Because I don't care what happens 50 years after I die, right? Like not that much. It doesn't pay my bills, but it might be better for the world. And so when you're planning for the world, it's different than when you're planning for yourself.
All right, so you guys have talked quite a bit about what you think is going to happen, but just to summarize, what do you guys see in terms of 2024 for Chattanooga specifically?
All right, well, residential, I don't think we see a whole lot different. I think we'll probably see inventory tick up into next year. I mean, it typically declines some over the holidays and through the winter, going into the spring selling season. I think if rates stay where they're at, I don't think we're going to see it come down too much. So I think we'll actually see it continue to rise. On the multifamily space, I don't think we're going to see anything with rents, at least on that. I think the A-class stuff you could, because they're building a lot of that around town. So that's the bubble that I see is A-class multifamily in conjunction with all the condo and development projects that are getting built in the south side and around the downtown area.
Yeah, even in Ottawa, there's like 2 new apartments like right there off Appleton Hawk. So
I don't think there's any real problem with A-class multifamily long term, but there could be a reduction in value over the next 12 months. I think interest rates are coming down in spite of what Brian says. I see no reason not to. And it's modeled into like, if you walk into a bank right now and you try to get a 12-month CD, you get one rate. If you want a 24-month CD, the rate's lower than the 12-month CD. That's very rare, but that's what's happening right now. Like, because everyone thinks interest rates are going down except for Brian, apparently.
No, I'm not the only one.
But
And I used to think, just for the record, up until a couple of weeks ago,
did change his mind
I
on it,
thought that they would come down. Now, I'm not thinking they're going to come down like 2 or 3 points in the next year, but I thought we might see a point and a half drop.
I think 2
potentially.
points at least in the next year.
Again, unless the shit really hits the fan, economically speaking, later in the next year, I don't see why the Fed has much of a reason to manipulate them. And let's be honest, that's exactly what they do.
Well, that's all they do, right? But anyway, I actually agree with most everything else Brian said. I think inventories will stabilize. I don't think they're going to go up very high. I mean, it might be up 5% or something, but I don't think inventories are going to change that much. I don't think pricing is going to change that much. I don't think housing affordability is going to change that much. I think we're kind of in this like weird limbo where it's just going to kind of chill for a while, and that could last for 2 or 3 years, actually.
Wait, Brian, but why did you change your mind? Like, what changed a couple weeks ago?
I pivoted, man. No, it's you look at things. I mean, I know we just had like a pretty bad jobs report for the last month, but then you saw what last quarter was something like 4% growth. If we're hitting numbers like that, they're not going to come down They don't have. There's no incentive.
Yeah,
to,
for
right?
sure,
I mean,
Brian's right on this. So like basic economic interest rate theory goes like this. Raise interest rates, it discourages investment, it slows the economy. Inflation is just an overheated economy. So the way you slow the economy down is you raise rates, raise the cost of capital. We've raised rates. The economy slowed down a little bit.
They're trying to kill
and
it,
it just
and they haven't
keeps going
succeeded.
and going and going and going. And unless the economy goes into a recession, they're not going to do dramatic rate reductions. I do think they will go down because the Fed has this irrational belief that they can hit a soft landing. I thought there was no chance of it 2 years ago. Now I'm looking at it and like maybe they'll pull this off. But the soft landing is we get to where we are right now and then we slowly lower rates so that the economy never crashes. I don't think that they're going to be successful in that. I think they'll end up lowering rates too fast, cause inflation to spike back up. This is what happened post World War II. Rates went up and down like crazy. Inflation went up and down like crazy. You had 1945. Inflation was double digits. 1943 we had 1946 we had deflation for 1 year. 1947 we had double-digit inflation again. Prices went way up, then they went down. Then they went way up, then they went down. And they didn't know how to control it because economic theory wasn't quite as good. Plus, the Fed didn't have as much power then as they have now. The problem is I don't trust the Fed not to screw this up, so I suspect we'll see rates go down, then go back up, then go down, then go up, and I think inflation's going to do the same thing. And we could have 4 or 5 years of really toppy, weird real estate investing. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think the economy is going to be really confused. And I mean, who knows? We got also like presidential election stuff coming up in the next 12 months. That could make a difference. But yeah, I mean, as far as locally though, the economy is really stable here. I wouldn't worry about it. Long term, you're fine. Just buy stuff that works and wait for it to get better.
All right, you guys give it up for Brian and Jeff. That was awesome. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you. I'm excited.